Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar of the Gerhard Center Plus 100 webinar series. Today, we're very honored to have with us Sonja Haut, the author of The Case for Impact. She will speak to us about ESG, sustainability, and impact. As I've mentioned, Sonja is the author of The Case for Impact, which is published in 2022. As the head of impact valuation at Novartis, she has worked on impact valuation since 2015. And leads Novartis Value Balancing Alliance engagement. She is a member of the Capital Coalition Advisory Panel and Value Commission, the WEF Global Future Council, Future of Growth, starting 2023, Economic Growth and Recovery between 2020 and 2022, and New Economic Agenda between 2019 and 2020. She's also the co-chair of the Valuation Technical and Practitioner Committee of the International Foundations for Valuing Impacts, and is part of the ISSB Technical Reference Group. Sonja earned an MBA from IMD, Lausanne, Switzerland, and holds a degree in physics and mathematics from the University of Freiburg, Germany. She's also a First Movers Fellow of the Aspen Institute, USA. Without much ado, Sonja, it's a pleasure to have you with us. The floor is yours, dear.
Hey, thank you so very much, Ali, for your kind words of introduction. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you. I've seen some familiar faces, other faces not, but names. Other names I do not yet know, but I'm looking forward to interacting with you throughout the time we have together. As Ali said, this session is supposedly about ESG sustainability and impact, and I'll try to expose you to some elements of the thinking that has emerged for me over the years that I've been working on measuring and valuing impacts. To support the talk, I'll be sharing my screen, if I can do so. So let me see whether this works. And as of this point in time, I'm I cannot see your comments anymore. So Ali, if there's someone wanting to come in, or any one of you wanting to comment or has questions, please do so. Since I'm sharing the screen here on Zoom, I will not be able to see you and your interaction directly. So, all right, ESG sustainability and impact. Last year, I published a book on the case for impact from the point of view of practitioners, and that's been a highlight after years of working on the topic. Within the company and within that area of measuring and valuing impact, we've applied a very specific notion of impact. I mean, many of you may have had exposure to that term, and in recent months, maybe years even, it has really gained a lot of traction, and a lot of people call impact many things. So in my work, I've try to consistently apply a definition of impact following the impact management platform and the G7 impact task force, which is that impact is a change in an aspect of people's well-being or the condition of the natural environment caused by an organization. Now, that is a bit of a mouthful. And to simplify things, I've often paraphrased this definition by saying it is about long-term value creation. Now, saying long-term value creation is also not without issues. So here a few perspectives on long-term. Of course, what is long-term is not uniquely understood the same way. If you look at the different life expectancies around the globe, there are significant differences of, if you take the extremes of 30 years is round about one generation. And then if you paraphrase that, if you link that to the currently ongoing debates in, I'm based in Switzerland, so the currently ongoing debates in neighboring France around retirement age, that also ranges, it puts things into perspective, right? my role at Novartis is hosted in the accounting department, and as you know, financial results get published in a quarterly rhythm, so every 3 months. The attention span in adults is supposedly lower than 9 seconds, which is shorter than the average TikTok video length of 10 to 15 seconds. So the question is, what is long-term as well? But still, I hope that the notion of long-term value creation still resonates and means something to you. And things are fairly subjective. So if we look at the other component, which is value, then the question is indeed what is it that we talk about? And early theories of economic value have been so-called objective theories of value that are driven by production or the output of certain manufacturing processes. And over time, the more subjective theories of value have started to prevail, that value is revealed through the exchange, the value in use, or a stated preference. And on that one, some of you may recall the Shakespearean quote on a horse, my kingdom for a horse, that Richard III exclaims in a play. Clearly a very strong revealed preference of the person being ready to give everything just for an animal. Now, the question is, on these notions of values, how are they expressed in what it is that we attribute value to in the business environment? And well, in business, value is attributed through profits. And on an aggregate level for countries, this is about GDP. How do these things ever reflect what it is that we value as people, as persons, and how does it link to measuring and valuing a change in well-being? Well, very simply put, it does not. So the existing established ways of attributing value to the activities that we do, that we habitually measure, fall short of really expressing and covering what it is that most of us value one way or the other. Colin Mayer has put forth a notion of value creation and said value is created by producing profitable solutions for the problems that people and the planet face, and not profiting from creating these problems in the first place. So that's quite strong. So this elevates the notion of people and planet on the same level as profits, and also introduces this notion of a threshold, right? That certain things shouldn't be excessively negative. So this statement of Colin certainly resonates broadly and continues to do so. And why is that? It's clearly the case and observable that values have shifted and do continue to shift. I've put together here 3 points of evidence. The first one is the pivotal work by George Serafin from the Harvard Business School, who's shown that over time, if you observe a stock market performance over several decades, there is a positive correlation of companies with superior ESG performance and that stock market performance. Already almost 10 years back, large investors have polled the next generation of investors, since the baby boomers will transfer their wealth to the next generation. And in the US alone, we talk about $30 trillion in wealth that is being transferred. And the interest of these new investors is certainly that they want a financial return, but at the same time, they want this money to actually help resolve existing challenges. And this wanting to have a positive contribution is certainly expressed as well by the growing impact investing space, which has been nowhere at all in 2016, emerging in 2017, and stands now at a total market value of $1 trillion. More recent examples include a consumer survey by McKinsey, where they could show that consumer preferences shift in certain markets towards sustainable products, and that people are willing to pay a higher price. So that is actually underlying some of these trends that I spelled here out. And as well, on a post by Paul Pullman in February revealed that in the meantime, employees are really placing an emphasis on the notion of purpose and actively select their employment through that lens. So there is a shift in values that is already observable, and this continues to shift. So here in the notion of the financial market, of capital markets, this entire topic of what's important beyond profits is often referred to as ESG, environmental, social, and governance. So one would think that this is then actually the answer to that challenge of including elements beyond profits into our valuation and in the attribution of value. Now, in the however, though, this topic of ESG is highly controversial. The theme has come up and was launched by the UN in 2014 by the Environmental Program Financial Initiative. And in those 20 years, what has happened is that while this lingered at the level of the UN with the best intentions for sure, and with for sure the ambition that this gets to the financial market and corporate players as quickly as ever possible, 20 years are a lot of time. And in the meantime, a lot of frameworks have sprouted, expressing, trying to measure that notion of environmental, social, and governance. And some of the names I saw in the conference, I know that your working history and your active job is precisely on that, trying to find a path for your companies in that confused space of ESG. Now, at its conception, ESG was designed to articulate the risk of megatrends on companies' profitability. And this is now super interesting because in the latest accusations towards ESG have not only been that there's confusion, aggregate confusion in the words of the Financial Times, which would be explainable through the hundreds of ratings and rankings and indices that all tease out certain aspects of ESG. No, it's been called a mirage, a gravy train, and even be accused of systematically drive greenwashing. Why is that? And to me, a very pivotal moment was this Bloomberg article on the ESG mirage, because it accused MSCI, one of the largest rating companies, of providing a wrong picture on companies' ESG performance. Now, I think it's a bit unfair on MSCI, because they do what ESG was designed to do in the first place. They try to capture the risk of megatrends on companies' profitability. However, in this article, the compare and contrast is not to that, but it's about they do not try to measure the impact of a corporation on the environment and society, which is a notion that ESG never set out to do. And of course, in the US, the theme is entirely politicized, beyond comprehension on this side of the pond, if you allow, Kelsey. So I'm always happy to learn more about how this come about and how such elements can of controversy can be addressed in a constructive way. So it's been super important that actually Vanina Farber has come forth with that positioning on how ESG is neither woke, that is an accusation that has come up in those politicized debates, but also that it's not sustainability. And Vanina really brings out that, well, you can look at that entire topic of what are companies shaped by the mega trends, and what are the entailed risks, and what is it that companies do to actually shape and drive such mega trends. So you can think for the moment, please, I invite you to think of ESG and sustainability as the extremes on a scale whereby ESG would be solely on assessing the risk on companies' profit in the view of megatrends, and sustainability would be the other extreme, that is solving the world's greatest challenges, maybe, if you like, as expressed by the UN SDGs. If we think in these extremes and circle back to Colin Mayer's definition that value creation and long-term value creation should be about providing profitable solutions while respecting planetary boundaries and human rights, then for most companies this means neither solely focusing on working towards the SDGs nor solely mitigating ESG risks. And in my work at Novartis, this entire bandwidth of ESG articulating risk, but also just seeking what really makes a positive difference, and this vast space in between on how can companies find profitable solutions to resolve issues that society and the environment have, can be covered by measuring and valuing impact. In view of that, I thought it makes sense to try and articulate the value driving potential of the art and the discipline of measuring and valuing impact through the lens of value drivers. And they're spelled out in the book in 7 drivers of value. Very shortly summarized, this is about you can utilize measuring and valued impacts in the notion of driving top line growth, in addressing risk and therefore taking out bottom line risks and threats, but also in company valuation. To me, possibly the most powerful element in view of the disparate dialogues that are going on, and often conversations full of hatred, if they happen at all, is the 7th element of theme alignment. So to me, and the challenges that stem from megatrends are of course not rarely solvable by one actor alone, and very rarely can they be even understood through just the lens of one economic actor. So the question is, how do we know what we want to do together, and where do we even start? And this power of understanding what makes a difference to stakeholders, how can we articulate that, what is it that we can capture in what truly has made a difference to the well-being of stakeholders and the state in the environment, and is that good enough? What else do we want in the present for the future, and what are the decisions today that can help us get there? Has been just such a good basis for a solid dialogue that I've come to really deeply appreciate the power of the approach. Another element having worked for a pharmaceutical for the past 2 decades, this notion of innovation has been, of course, always been very very much at the forefront of the company's ambition. And so to me, it was sort of a no-brainer that the notion of innovation management should come up through my work as well, because this is simply what the company does. But the most surprising element to me in my research for the book has been that also other innovators have utilized impact transparency on their products to introduce their innovations. And one I found very amazing example was one around an element for new animal nutrition that innovated by having the same nutritional value for the livestock, but with much lower environmental damage through waste, And I found that intriguing, for one, that it's technically feasible to do that, but then also that this is what it would take, because one would think a good idea that is that strong goes and sells by itself. But of course, in the fight for attention and getting people to appreciate an innovation, it makes sense to really take an extra effort. So in the book, you will find examples for each of those 7 drivers of value. Together with a series of companies, one has worked together to really find ways of measuring and valuing impacts in the dimension of social matters and environmental matters and in the economic space. And in the area of the environment, in the meantime, well, no, let me start elsewhere. And the plan is, as per these method papers, is that one really captures not only the confined space of own operations, which is covered by traditional financial reporting, but the entire value chain as well. And by doing that, for social and environmental matters, one can really gauge a very comprehensive way of assessing on what's truly happening to stakeholders in the way a business operates, including its entire supply. Now, nothing is as strong as a good example, and it's been a great privilege to be able to pull up a repository of examples. So under cci-summit.com, you'll find a repository of background materials, but also of use cases for what companies felt comfortable of sharing and what I found actually in the public space. There are a number of contextualizing items, such as various opinion pieces from me, but also an exposure of a digital game that I've utilized a lot. I mean, my starting point was on shifting values and how this ought to translate to business. But as a matter of fact, this approach is rather novel, right? And to invite people to think along and lean in and experience what that could mean and what it would look like, and also what it would take for one personally to take a decision, how that would feel. Would we feel comfortable with this way or not in a game environment, has really proven very valuable, because it takes out, for one, the pressure of the moment that's so heavily laden with the burden to get it right, but also with certain moralistic aspects that are sometimes overshadowing the debate currently. So it's available openly. Feel free to check it out. The examples are fully searchable. So measuring and valuing impact. Our traditional metrics of performance, success, and value are metrics of inputs and outputs, and that's true for the performance of companies. It's true also for economies. But measuring inputs, our efforts, and outputs, what has come out immediately, doesn't make a statement on what has changed for the better or the worse of a stakeholder or of a recipient of that change or of that activity of an organization. And while companies diligently record costs and their sales, they traditionally do not capture how they made a difference to the world for the better or the worse in the components of social, human capital, air emissions, water waste, and all the other elements. So only by measuring impacts can we get to that point, and valuing those impacts makes them comparable and helps us understand how strong and relevant and material in financial terms these respective impacts are. So to me, that comes very much a matter of plan beats no plan. And I'm quoting here a US Treasury person who has used that phrase in the financial crisis. So clearly, with measuring and valuing impacts, that's a way to actually get through and beyond the confusion that comes from both the upcoming legislation around ESG. It also helps cut through the plethora of acronyms, and it certainly helps get clearance on what one wants to stand for. So over time, I found this approach to help companies get strategic clarity on where they want to be, how they want to enact their purpose, but also get consistency in their operations and get a story to tell consistently and coherently internally and to their external stakeholders. So pretty much what this implies is that the utilization of thinking about what makes a difference to stakeholders in today's very volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous environment is indeed a call for leadership. And the call for leadership comes on several levels. I teased out here three. Clearly, the mega trends on climate change, rising inequality, are and all the others are hyper. And actually, going into this call, Ali and I talked about mass extinctions that are looming. There are enormous complexity, and at the same time, both the education systems and the way people are brought up in corporate careers nurture a craving for simplification and simplicity. This doesn't do justice to the nature of the problem. So leaders today really need to understand how to manage complexity and cater for these ambiguities and volatilities that are just there to stay and cannot be reduced by a pure perspective of simplification. Another one is really close to my heart is this topic of the innovation challenge. We're an ingenious species. We are not short of ideas, but the question is, which ideas do we give the opportunity to really scale? So how can we truly build on what's there and will help us reduce the challenges that we're facing? So it's much more a matter of how can we get things done effectively, how can we scale things, how can we give a good idea a chance. So much more a question of solidly executing than of generating ideas. Another one that I found intriguing for myself is this notion of one can only innovate so far. There's out of engineering design and consumer acceptance, there's the saying of you gotta go for the most advanced yet acceptable, and they call it the Maya principle. So the question is, how far can you go with your innovation? And clearly, if you innovate beyond your customer base and your audience, you will lose them all, and they will certainly not buy in to you taking them along on the journey of change. So be aware of those limits, test them, and then it's a matter of expanding what's possible step by step. An element of framing and reframing is often super helpful. I've been very early on fascinated by the work of George Kohlreiser and his book Hostage at the Table, who shows that people who can effectively reframe even situations of death and life manage to survive situations that others don't and wouldn't. So the question is really, should you zoom in, zoom out, look at the things sideways, and question yourself and your team and the situation on whether it's both looked at from a system intertwined holistic perspective, or maybe from the perspective that is super granular and super individual and really confined. Both approaches have their value, but there's an art of shifting between those lenses and looking the lens that opens the space for solutioning instead of remaining at the level of problem descriptions. Humankind has done this for a long time, but maybe at the moment there we're well, maybe at the moment for certain elements of necessary elements of change, there is a bit of a fear of finding out that is prevailing corporate debates, whereby one really sticks to what one knows already and that is proven and tested. Now, what is proven and tested wouldn't have brought us where we are now. So I'm sharing with you one of the earlier maps of the world one could possibly identify with a bit of creativity, where Egypt should be located. But on this medieval map on the known world of I don't know even who it was in Europe who put this forth, that while this was in its entire imperfection has clearly still delivered the ability to move forward. So while no metric system can be perfect, I think it would be the wrong ambition to get things perfectly right. So the question is, which are the metrics that are good enough to move ahead? And out of my work with measuring and valuing impact, I can clearly say we can get full transparency on social impacts along the entire supply chain. We can get full environmental transparency along the entire supply chain. So it is certainly possible, and with that we can navigate effectively and get a better map for the future. And as we expand our knowledge, our maps will become more accurate. And really, it's down to us. It's up to us. It's up to each of us. And that has been a main message that I retained from a conference on value and values earlier this year in Oxford, where Celia Hayes shared her insights from her field of study, which is evolutionary psychology. And while towards the end of last century, the prevailing belief was really that we're shaped by a nature that is our DNA, and that is pretty much then strongly followed by our upbringing. But that beyond that, left and right, things are pretty much determined. Whereas nowadays, the understanding is that what we're shaped by is culture, so rather people who are around us, and then maybe the ones closest to us. So nurture as a on the slide here as a paraphrase for parents. And yes, of course, there's a DNA element of our talents and that we're born with, but really the prevailing thing is the element of culture, who's around, which means that for everything we want to achieve, everything we have to achieve, the question is, who do we surround us with? And there's a famous notion to actually think of this in that we're pretty much defined by the 6 people we spend most time with. They shape what we think, who we are, what we believe is possible. So it's really down to us. Things are not predefined, and in my mind, this is a super optimistic way of ending this. This way of it's onto us has also been articulated by Cristiana Figueres, who's been the lead negotiator for the Paris Agreement. And for those of you interested, I can only recommend listening into her podcast that is also called Outrage and Optimism. With that, thank you very much for listening, and I'm looking forward to the debate.
Thank you, Sonja. I have a few questions, and then after that, we're going to open the Q&A from the audience. Please prepare your questions and raise your hand, and we'll let you answer. We'll let you ask your own question. It's interesting when you talk about the time. It was quoted actually Xu Enlai, who was in early 1970s, the premier of China. They asked him what did they think about the success of the French Revolution, and his answer was it's too early to tell. But then anyway, my questions are just going to be about concepts. For example, when you talk about value, or what to measure, there is already a discrepancy or a gap between what the business would want to measure, would want to show, and what the stakeholders or the community or society would want to show. Now, how do you make sure that there is an alignment between both? But that's the first question. And it is related to the other one, which is when you say impact valuation, my understanding from your writings is that it's about valuing the positive and negative externalities related to society and the environment. And there are lots of arguments is that if the government actually cost or price externality in a proper way, there might not be even a notion of impact investment because company will act accordingly, right? What I'm referring to here is the issue of governance. How do you make sure that companies are not going to sort of do value or impact washing, SDG washing, greenwashing, all that kind of a thing to look good while not really doing anything or not doing enough, not doing what they should be doing? So I just wanted to hear your opinion about this.
Yeah, thank you, Ali. All super valuable points and super important notions, of course. Well, the thing is on this question of the discrepancy of what companies do and what stakeholders ask, I think this is precisely the reason what made certain companies that I quote in the book go forward with their innovations, with their employee retention in one example, to really be transparent about their impacts. And the ability to actually have this, provide this encompassing transparency and then zoom into what is most relevant for a community or for a region, for a country, for a certain specific stakeholder group is really ever so powerful because it helps the starting point of shared facts. And I think often we miss this. And that's often because those data sets are not complete enough. So I can only encourage everyone who struggles with that discrepancy to look simultaneously at all social impacts that you can get your hand around and all environmental impacts, positive and negative, own operations, entire supply chain, and then engage with those stakeholders and multi-stakeholder dialogues. And to me, Ali, actually, what I found often is that the discrepancies, they're not so often between a company and all its stakeholders, but often the various stakeholder groups have diverging needs, and this is for one important for companies to understand how to navigate that, with the understanding that most likely you will not get it right for everyone all the time, but you need to get it right often enough for everyone. And to understand that is super helpful. It's also helpful for those stakeholders to understand that their object of interest is pulled in different parts. So I found bringing together people who are ready to debate about certain issues in a multi-stakeholder dialogue ever so powerful. So on the topic of governance, yeah, in a perfect world, governance would have universally aligned on all the issues upfront and found the right policies to prevent them from happening. The thing is, over the years, we do not even have the slightest agreement on a value of a straightforward externality as carbon. So and to me, I have to say it hurts enormously to have so much of the debate focused on climate change, and within climate change only on the CO2 emission side, whereas things are much more intertwined, much more complex, and I believe they need to discuss collectively. I of course know that people shy away from having that entire debate in the same go because it's so complex and we strive for simplicity, but that's in my mind the beauty of measuring and valuing impact, is that you have still a simplified way, but on the entirety of topics, which allows one to zoom in and out, but maintaining a big picture on what it is one talks about. And do governments play a role? Yes, of course. Actually, Ali, I would hope that prospectively in the entire debates of governance to move beyond the notion of watching over GDP, that entire beyond GDP effort at some point also systematically includes these social and environmental aspects. That it can be done has been shown there. Actually, the government of Australia has a regulatory impact assessment team that supports every major policy decision of the Australian government by an assessment of the economic, social, and environmental impacts that decision will have. So it's certainly possible also on that level, but of course it would be helpful if the notion of what defines wealth of a nation also recognizes these aspects of society and the environment, and not only the economic side of things.
Okay, I'm gonna compare it to just the financial statement, just the earnings. I mean, there is still, until recently, lots of debate about standards, and there are lots of, and then there is a third-party auditor who would come and audit your financial statement. Do you see such a thing for evaluating impact, that you should have really standards? And I don't know if the ISSB standards that were announced the end of not last year, the year before, actually, are relevant. And then the audit. You need an audit, right? You need somebody to audit, to verify, a third party to verify that whatever you claim about valuing your externalities, especially if it's positive, is correct or not.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a fascinating thing in that the existing standards and that are being prepared, they do not precisely ask for impact to be measured. However, informally, there's a lot of positive feedback from the leaders at the ISSB on our work on measuring and valuing impact. And much to my surprise, in a debate of someone who's been contributing to shape the EFRAG standards on ISRS 1 to 4, much to my surprise, called the impact valuation approach as a pragmatic way of satisfying these requirements. So while it's not explicitly spelled out, there's clearly a move towards that. But absolutely, Ali, whatever standards will be put forward, and in effect, they will have to be audited the same way as financials do. And since you mentioned ISSB, there's a clear positioning that prospectively even the timing of sustainability disclosures ought to be absolutely in line with financial disclosures, so that you do not have a time lag of an integrated report or a sustainability report, but that you really have that synchronized.
Yeah. Just want to give you an interesting example. It's actually from the project management literature. Usually the way you assess a project is that if it's delivered the scope within planned time and within budget. Now, usually they have two examples of two projects. One of them is the Sydney Opera House, which was way above time, way above budget, but it delivered in scope, but then really after like 10 years and probably 3-4 times the budget. And they compare it to LA, Los Angeles, and believe it or not, they have a metro. And this project actually got the award of the PMI. Now, when you can rarely associate LA, and I'm not sure if anybody in LA ever used the metro, but you can hardly think about Sydney without associating it with the Opera House. It's one of the UNESCO heritage. And again, it's an issue of how do you measure impact, which is really long-term, which is really after the fact, which is really after the scope. And it's just an inherent difficulty, right? Whether it's a social or whatever impact.
Yeah, totally agree. So there is this challenge of the horizons, and they're certainly not uniform. And also things may change. I mean, with every building in existing cities, you will have the topic of if you build something new now in the middle of the city, you will always have shadows. So previously sunny spots will become a shadow, and a shadow versus sun will be perceived differently in Copenhagen versus Cairo. So there's this element of which time horizons do you look at, which is why the analogy with financial reporting is so super powerful. In financial statements, we look at past year's performance. In impact valuation, we can do the exact same thing. We can look at the impact the company created, positive and negative, entire supply chain, own operations last year. So this gives a perspective on, well, actually, what did my investment deliver last year, if you look at it from an investment lens, but it also gives management the view on, okay, with our decision portfolio last year, this is where we ended up. Which is a nice anchoring point, and which is why I believe that this notion of transitioning from community-based, targeted, confined impact investings that are valid in a certain location and over a certain period, this notion of taking this thinking of impact to larger businesses has the potential to be a game changer, because with that we know year over year what the generated impact is. And actually with the tools that are created, I see Ahmed is on the call, so I know that he knows that impact transparency along sectors and countries is entirely possible with that. So any investor could have a transparency of impacts in the sectors they are invested in. Any government could have complete transparency on the sectors that are strongest in their country. And then that would actually free those governments from disclosure practices of companies. They could just say, well, this is the benchmark for your industry. And if you're an actor in this industry, then tell us why you're better and explain us why you're worse, right? And then you have a different element of empowerment, and where people are no longer passively waiting for. And also this element that you mentioned, it would advance things. You don't have to wait for an end of an investment cycle. Instead, you can know already today what the impact transparency is of a certain sector and start that debate now and engage on, hey, we like you for this positive performance. We don't like these negative impacts. So what is the plan ahead? And so I think that way, those debates can be really constructive.
Lovely. I have two questions. One, Ahmed is raising his hand, so I'm going to go with him first, and then May Sitanidi. So we're going to start with Ahmed first. Ahmed, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ali. And I'd like to also thank the Gerhardt Center today for organizing this very valuable webinar. My name is Ahmed Saddi. I'm Senior Manager at Global Health Economics and Outcomes Research Team at Daiichi Sankyo. It's a Japanese pharmaceutical company. Sonja, very nice to see you again today. A great pleasure to see you. We've worked together in the past exactly on those topics, so it's very nice to see you talking about this today. I found a lot of inspiration in your book. Definitely, I was just meaning, of course, to send you a very comprehensive review of mine. So definitely helped me a lot with advancing this topic in my current line of work in the organization. I'm just interested that I've been seeing you also, like, after publishing the book, going into events, socializing the whole, the concepts that you're trying to push forward. And I'm sure it's just very similar to sort of environmental activism, sort of you're trying to bring forward the importance of the topic and make people aware of how this can change businesses and advance things forward. I'm also sure you've been also met with a lot of skepticism that could be the underlying part of it is cynicism, kind of, and this is can be energy consuming, and I'm actually interested in the entire opposite. if you can share with us like examples where you were faced with, I'd say, like pockets of high energy, people who just maybe positively surprised you with their engagement and their goodwill and readiness to actually just, you know, like roll their sleeves and get going with advancing these concepts, because it takes a lot of energy, of course, to get people buying in and actually doing the effort that's needed, like research, implementation, etc., to see this actually realized. So happy to hear your experiences where it was positively met.
Yeah, Ahmed, clearly our own journey was clearly among the positive ones, and the way you've carried it forward also with parts of the Egyptian health ministry. I think the key is to find others with a shared passion, with a similar vision, and then pair that with the ability to move forward. And that actually over time it has always worked, and in the most surprising instances. So the question you're asking is often asked from that angle, or from the angle of, well, which are the functions that you typically work with? The thing is, there's no such a thing like a typical role or typical actor or typical function, because the key is really to find individuals who want to advance the agenda in a constructive way. As you mentioned, it's always easy to be cynical. It's easy to find the flaws, but the question is, how do we go about things and how do we move things? So over time, this has successfully worked in so many instances. The fact that we could bring together the Value Balancing Alliance, the fact that your former colleagues at Y4 are established the way they are, the working relationships that now exist with the IFBI in the US and the Harvard Business School, the fact that there were so many, so I think there are these pockets of people around the globe who really share this passion and don't want to stop at this level of where we simply accept that this will take time. I don't know whether you captured my opinion piece with the Center for Corporate Reporting, that here in Switzerland we had this vote on responsible business and how companies should go about their supply chain transparency. And the idea and the initial request for the public vote was really was expected to be excessive. But now, of course, what's happening is that companies lobby for as little disclosure as ever possible, and some do this openly negatively, and others do it in a covert way by saying, well, we need technological advancement. By the time we have the metaverse, Ahmed, we need the metaverse, and once we have the metaverse, then all of these things will be possible. And to just, so in that article, I say, well, actually, we don't need to wait for the metaverse. We can have this now, and let's do it now. Like, so I'm always looking for people who are ready to collaborate with me to constructively disrupt this entire debate.
Lovely. Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you, Sonja. May, please.
Yes, hello. My name is May Seitanidi. I'm a reader at the University of Kent at Kent Business School in the UK. Thank you so much for your very interesting presentation. So my research is within corporate social responsibility, and I have PhD students. One of my PhD students studies, for example, sustainability reporting, and looks into the role of dialogue. But my question is about something that you said that took me by surprise, because I'm just trying to think about the implementation. So you said, I think, that it's up to companies to take action and assess their impact, which of course, you know, we would all agree and we would like to see it happening. But one of the problems I would think is that some products are more difficult and challenging to trace, such, for example, cotton, right? So we had the case of Uzbekistan, which, you know, the government was abusing its citizens, and then you had the Western companies that exercised pressure, but then they still manage to find a way out because of the problems with the product. So one is which I think perhaps links with your previous comment about the technology and the need to have, in some cases at least, technology in place. And the second point that I'd like your views on is that it seems that companies are either afraid or cautious, or with regards to the trade-offs between transparency and being opaque. So they prefer to being opaque and not reveal as much as they could. So they hold back because of the role of the media, the role of non-profit organizations. Now, here we have a kind of tri-balance, which is not really a balance. It's like a terrain with multiple dynamics that, the governments want non-profits and the media to hold to account businesses, right? Because of the lack of transparency in their reports, in the way they implement the standards. So you see, my point is, if even the Modern Slavery Act, the way it has been set up, which is called, I think, reflective legislation without teeth, it's introduced in a way that gives a large amount of time for companies to adopt because of the cost involved, but with the assumption that the positive effects will trickle down from the large companies, the most progressive ones, to the rest of the companies, and that citizens, media, and non-profits will hold them to account. So how do you see all this? Sorry for the long question. Thank you so much.
No, you're spot on, May. And hey, thank you so much for your research efforts. We need more knowledge, more PhDs are required, more insights are required. We need to advance humanity with more knowledge, very clearly. So thank you for that. On the topic of transparency, yes, of course, there's a prevailing fear of finding out. There's a fear of a first mover disadvantage, which is why I marvel at what Nestle have done with the food sector instead of trying to advance certain elements just by themselves, mobilizing really policymakers, but also their customers, wholesalers, also smallholders, farmers, to gather around the table on that question on what is the impact of food from the first agricultural step to the moment we buy this. And thanks to this, in the meantime, larger effort, we know what the huge negative impacts of food are today, and we know that as consumers we do not pay or make up for the negative externalities created. So there is this element of first mover disadvantage. Since you mentioned cotton, I would expect that certain elements around textiles are similar. So the question to me is, how can we have a sector approach rather than a individual company approach? Because even the best intended companies would position themselves under the risk of an enormous shitstorm. And what does it help if the well-intended companies get beaten up because they're not good enough? And nobody is good enough. And to me, personally, as much as I value Patagonia, I was really heartbroken to see them leave the corporate space by becoming a foundation, because in some ways this is a bit giving up, right? So I was hoping they could be the ones who could pave the way on how you go about these things. And now they have for sure more degrees of freedom, but how can you still utilize them as an example for listed corporations exposed to the pressure of shareholders? So yeah. So yes, which is why, since we've moved forward in my work with impact transparency, and this is all statistical, this is for sure not as sophisticated as your research is. What it does, it gives a first cut on what a sector performance could be. And at the same time, it helps companies to get the statistical perspective on their social, environmental, and economic impacts of their value chain. And of course, the moment you work with vendors from a company perspective and get to better data, you can always, replace this and get to a better knowledge. And the moment you are tracing a critical material, like your cotton example, then you can get to that level of granularity that ultimately is required. But at the moment, the trouble is that neither the majority of companies, the majority of investors, the majority of governments do not even take that first step, because it's not possible, because of perceptions, it's too costly. You can have an endless list of why not, and they're all variations of it's so comfortable to just do nothing. So here, by the fact that just by growing that impact valuation practice, certain things have emerged that I believe are ready to be taken on. I hope that can be a contribution to a debate where it's no longer possible to say it's not feasible. We have proven feasibility. So, and by doing so, I would hope that there are either governments or groups of governments, or to take this up, even maybe activist institutions, although it's maybe a bit disrupting their business model as well. But that we collectively advance by saying, well, that we have that transparency, we can stop debating about how we can only measure CO2. I've had these conversations a few weeks back with major strategy consultancies just saying, well, we provide carbon footprints, scope 3 to our clients, and it just drives me nuts. I mean, this should be available for free, more or less, right? Because this is just the entry point of everything else that we ought to be debating. So your point is well taken. It's not trivial, for sure, with this wave of upcoming regulatory requirements in the US, in Europe. The US have found an incentive way with the Inflation Reduction Act and the investment that entails to come with business incentives. Maybe this spurs the way of solutioning, collective solutioning, but we'll see. We'll see. It's not trivial, May. I'm sorry, I don't have ready-made answers better than the ones I've tried to give.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, May. We're going to take two questions. So we're going to extend a little bit beyond the 8 o'clock. We're going to take a question first from Richard Ingstrom, and then from Kelsey Ballantyne. So we start with Richard.
Thank you very much here, Ali and Garrett Center, for having me and listening in on this very inspiring piece from Sonja. I've not read your book, but I need to get hold of it quickly, I think, and jump into it. And I don't really know exactly where to start. We could start with what you just said on Patagonia. Should you change things from inside out, be part of the corporate world, or should you change things from outside in to leave the system and state new examples of how you can do? But I wanted to start where you said about values. You value what is based on the values you have, and you say yourself, who are you surrounded with? So you can argue, and you might do that already in your book, that the financial system industry, that's the largest problem we have, because they don't strive for equality and to be social and environmental net positive, because the economic and financial model where we measure well-being with GDP and success criteria in ROI, that doesn't allow them to strive for equality or for being social environmentally net positive. So when I look at your 7 values, value drivers here for the impact case, I see them as very corporate centric. If you look at design thinking today, I just read a book from a very two Danes who have it's called Expand, and I can point it to you. Very interesting. They say now in design thinking we go from user centric, where we have commercially built products and designs from the user perspective to life-centric. Because we know that if we are not life-centric, everything will go into Armageddon. So maybe we need to go look for drivers that are not corporate-centric, but that are societal and environmental-centric in the way moving forward. And you might already debate this in your book. So I think my question here, just with those analogs, can the financial sector change this themselves, or will they always be reactive and utilizing the financial benefits from those megatrends? And now we might have the last megatrend in humanity, that everything is going down the spiral. So I'm asking, could the financial industry going forward, or do we as society have to go forward and limit the financial industry? So impact investing might be a new norm, that is not corporate centric, but societal, environmental centric. It was a long question here, but I was so inspired by your different pieces you laid out here.
Yeah, totally, Richard. Absolutely. I mean, the vision would be that we live in the future in an impact economy where the only way of investing is impact investing, and where you always have full transparency of the ups and the downs and the sideways of all the actions. And when I buy a product, irrespective of large or small, I as a consumer, I know how much of a social or environmental issue or upside I'm subsidizing with my purchase decision. The question is how to get there. And I've on my journey as an entrepreneur, I've come to conclude that it cannot be, we cannot wait for one single actor or group of actors. So I'm happy for society to step up more. It's hard though to get society to speak with one voice, in all fairness. And the same would be true for investors. At some point I was dreaming that with what I've been working on, I would find an investor who would pick up those signals. Now, the more advanced, inspired investors who see that there's value in sustainable investment in its various ways and forms, those have already developed their own approaches. So don't have an interest in standardized sustainability metrics. They don't have actually an interest in the rest of the investors advancing, because this is their own competitive advantage, which is, it's sort of obvious in hindsight, but I needed to experience this myself to really understand that. And I believe similar mechanisms are true for all the players in this system. So for me, very much to your analogy of design thinking, is where are alliances? So to me, it's very much a multidimensional billiard game, right? Where things may not always be direct, but you can go over the edges. And the question is, who would be the recipients, and who would actually act as a positive reinforcement of the signal that you're sending? And how could you actually really truly work together to advance the field? I fear it cannot be either or. The thing is, of course I would want the public domain to move forward. It's been great that the UN has come forth with the SDGs. It's better to have them than not have them. At the same time, with this notion of ESG, now next year it will be 20 years. This is just a long time. So in the meantime, do we have to repeat known mistakes, or can we just already move on in a bit better way? And in the meantime, I very, very much to this Bloomberg article versus MSCI on just blaming ESG for that it delivers what it does. To me, this entire notion of that actually there is an interest in making things sustainable and society in its various ways or forms in an aggregate manner already expresses that, is a point in case. But how can you utilize that? Because if you zoom back to corporate reality of quarterly earnings, and the same is true for investors of quarterly reports, you would always say, well, actually what counts is what the share price does, what counts is what profitability does, and then all of it falls apart. So one lever could indeed be, what do governments do beyond GDP? What are the next evolutions on a supranational level? And could one, maybe it's hard to really get an alignment of the 200 countries represented by the UN, but maybe if one could just showcase that actually by providing impact transparency for all sectors globally, one can actually get to advance one's own economy towards the just transition that one ought to move forward. And maybe it's done by these examples. I mean, when I discovered that the government of Australia does regular impact assessment, I was totally stunned, because I, in my naivety, I would have thought that should something like that exist, it would have been adopted by everybody else already. But it's not the case, because there are efforts required also on that level. And if you screen statements by governments, you will find that many of them claim that they perform impact assessments, and often they're just qualitative. And you know what? Qualitative, in the corporate world, qualitative assessments are a bit like these glossy brochures where you have, it's
ESG by MSCI, that is all qualitative. That has nothing to do with quantitative data.
Yeah.
It's just reading different reports and media and stuff and make a assumption, right?
Exactly. So the question is really how to cut through. And yeah, I hope that by addressing elements on all these fronts, maybe Ali, to your earlier point on impact investing and how to scale that, maybe a transition vehicle would also be that instead of like dedicated smaller impact investors do whatever they do, and I hope they're properly audited and correctly classified. But what if impact investing, if impact bonds became a major source of financing for bigger business? Could we maybe that way move from, you have the world of impact investing that hopefully is good, and dirty capitalism? Could we maybe start to get towards a blend where everybody sees, well, the transition is possible, it doesn't hurt, things will be fine on the other side, you can do it, and then that way we can collectively learn. I just hope that such transition paths are possible.
I think there are many good signs, but we're also holding back because we are stuck in mental models. Okay, thanks a lot for your for small conversation here. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rich.
To be continued.
Now, the last question we're going to take is from Kelsey Valentine. Go ahead, Kelsey, ask your question.
All right. Hi, Sonja. This is on the same kind of trend as Richard's question, but it's more for the conscious quitters or the people who are working in these realms. So now ESG, kind of if you look at your ESG to sustainability, is being filled with more strategy and corporate team members versus people who are trained in sustainability, think in systems thinking, think in the SDGs. Where would you recommend professionals in true sustainability trained in this go to have the most positive impact on long-term value creation?
Oh, there are many programs. There are good programs. Would I want to recommend the one place? Oh, it's so hard, Kelsey. It's so hard. They are. I think I would come forth with a recommendation for how you would assess what a good training is. And a good training would be one whereby sustainability or CSR is not taught as an afterthought. So where you don't have like your business, finance, and controlling and strategy, and you also have a course that is called sustainability, but instead where the strategic thinking already permeates throughout. So where you almost have a metric set up where every subject discusses ESG sustainability matters at the same time. So you do not have anymore a strategy debate that just has Porter's 5 forces but ignores megatrends. You do no longer have an enterprise risk management session that focuses on 12 months and doesn't contain any thinking of how megatrends would shape corporate. So I think that would be my key criteria. Look for ways and where this is really happening. I don't know the US landscape good enough, Kelsey. But from the recent sound bites at IMD, this is precisely what's happening. And you can see even with those more advanced schools, how hard it is, because this requires to get faculty on board first, right? And then all the assignments and the case studies you need there. All of a sudden we realized how much more is required in that space. So, but yeah, that would be key. And another element is, of course, to move forward with the education of the incumbents of sustainability as well, right? Because many have had their formational years when this was corporate social responsibility and philanthropy, and they don't speak business enough to bring it to the next level. So yeah, pivotal question, Kelsey. Thank you. And good to see you.
Good to see you.
The end, I really want to thank you, Sonja, for really an amazing webinar. It's been a mind opener. And I thank all the participants for staying beyond the 8 o'clock mark. And I look forward to seeing you all in May. We're going to break for Ramadan, but then we're going to start back in May. Thank you, Sonja, again. It's been really a pleasure. I have lots of questions, but we'll take it offline.
To be continued. And yes, I'm available on LinkedIn. Do reach out to me. Happy to continue the debate. I believe it's an important one. Thank you. Thank you for today.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Take care now. Stay safe.